It's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and today I'll be providing you with my own personal cake sizing guide. This is not a pricing video, but instead we will focus on the standard cake sizes that I offered at my home bakery, as well as go over the cake sizing that I prefer to make now. Number 1, standard cake sizing at my home bakery. Sometimes when we're seeing so many over-the-top cakes on Instagram and social media, we can lose sight of the fact that most customers just want a standard, well-put-together cake. These standard cakes are actually your moneymaker, especially if you live in an area that isn't throwing huge parties, over-the-top celebrations, or events. Although it's great to do a bunch of huge 3-tiered cakes that earn you a lot of profit in one fell swoop, slow and steady sometimes wins the race, and this means making a lot of simple, appropriately priced cakes. With all that being said, it's important to set a few standard sizes at your bakery so that you know a fairly accurate serving portion. At my home-based bakery, I only offered 6, 8, and 10-inch cakes. I also offered carved cakes, but we'll get into that serving portion later. The reason that I only offered these sizes was really just to streamline everything. Anything smaller than a 6-inch for a custom order just wasn't worth it for me to make. If you saw my tiny watermelon cake video, then you probably heard me talk about how it's just not worth it for me or the customer, and I would have to charge quite a bit. It's not that I wouldn't offer this, especially requested, but the pricing would generally be the same as a 6-inch anyway, so most people would just opt for the 6-inch option. Number 2, let's get into those serving sizes. So customers generally have 2 fears when it comes to cake sizing: not enough cake or too much cake. And usually the latter is what generally ends up happening because most people constantly underestimate how large a cake really is. Take this cake for example. Most people would look at this cake and think that it would be more than enough to serve 10 to 15 people. But once it's all stacked up the way most custom cakes are, all of a sudden customers think that it's not enough. And this used to happen to us all the time at the bakery that I used to work at. We would show them the 2 cake pans that we would use to make their cakes, and they would often say it's not enough. And I honestly don't blame them. Even my estimation can be really off sometimes. It's our job though to make sure we've streamlined our cake sizing so that we know how much each cake generally serves. What I would say to my customers is that in general, a 6-inch cake feeds around 8 to 10 people, an 8-inch cake feeds around 10 to 15 people, and a 10-inch feeds around 15 to 20 people. I would also say though, if there's a lot of other food being served, expect that you will have leftovers. These estimations are on the lower side to ensure that customers won't run out of cake, because I personally think that not having enough cake is way worse than having too much. Moving along to my next point, carved cakes. Carved cakes are a bit of a different story. They're more difficult to gauge because let's say you start with 2 square 10 by 10 pans. If you were to consume all of that, then that would fall into that 15 to 20 person serving size. However, with a carved cake, you end up cutting off a lot. And if you've got a lot going on with your cakes, you might be using other edible mediums like Rice Krispie treats, which would also add to the serving size. For these type of cakes, you would have to estimate based on how many cake pans you are going to bake up. Just be sure that you make it clear the estimation for portion size will have a much wider range. One little side note about carved cakes, I never offered carved cakes that were made out of pans that were smaller than a 10-inch. It's important to remember that smaller doesn't always mean less work, so it's better to have a base size of your carved cakes to make it both worth it for you and the customer. And obviously, this would mean you also have a very high base pricing for your carved cakes as well. And finally, my favorite personal cake sizes that I actually like to use now. So if you've watched any of my videos in the past few months, then pretty much all of my tiered cakes have been made with 4-inch and 6-inch cakes stacked. I don't think I've made one 8-inch cake in a really long time. I do this to conserve cake, and because I can still convey and teach the same techniques on smaller cakes while making the most out of my ingredient budget, I stick with these sizes. In turn, however, I've discovered that this sizing personally works best for my friends and family's events. It's more than enough cake and it still looks impressively cute, as some of my friends and family describe it. I also make a lot of mini cakes for friends too, since at most of our events, they've all had plenty of my cakes or my friends' cakes. If you watched my video from yesterday, I featured my friend Rachel, and her and I make a lot of cakes, more than enough cakes for everybody. So most of them just want a small slice. So I find that even a small 4-inch cake can actually feed a group of 8, especially because we usually have a lot of other foods that we're serving at events. This cake is an excellent real-life example of how much cake people in my life want to eat. This cake ended up feeding 5 people, and it's less than 4 inches. I would gather it's about 3 inches big. But like I mentioned before, I basically serve my friends and family cake on a nearly weekly or a bi-weekly basis. This was actually a fairly highly requested video, so I hope that I gave you the information you were looking for. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys.